Welcome to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator. Today, we're looking at the supply and demand picture for satellite capacity in Asia and how it's shaping the decisions operators are making across the region. Joining us is Nathan de Ruiter, partner and managing director at Novaspace, to help us understand what's driving those shifts and what they mean for the competitive landscape in the years ahead. Nathan, you ready to jump in here?
All right, I am. Good to see you, John.
Good. So, Nathan, what does the current supply-demand balance for satellite capacity in Asia, what does that indicate about pricing power across the region?
Yeah, so historically, we tend to look at Asia as a single supply-demand market, but in reality, it's really a collection of highly fragmented national market, and each kind of shaped by its own regulatory environment, economic conditions, and national policy. So to give some perspective, Asia Pacific has traditionally been quite late in building some of this high throughput capacity and was often a little bit undersupplied. And even in 2025, when we look at the statistics, the region itself accounts only for 60% of the GeoHS supply compared to North America, despite having, let's say, about twice the land mass. So that picture, though, is kind of rapidly changing. First of all, we've just had a few days back the successful launch of the Viasat F3 satellite, which really will bring meaningful capacity into the region. And at the same time, obviously, the LEO constellation have pretty much changed the overall supply dynamic. But that also kind of brings to the key point, right? So LEO capacity supply is still heavily concentrated by primarily Starlink, and that's really why you also need to look at it a country by country basis, because when you look at Starlink, you look at where they are present today, it's about 29 of the kind of, let's say, close to 50 countries in APAC. So there's really still notably kind of significant gaps in where they are active and where that capacity can be used. So, markets like Thailand, India, Pakistan, Vietnam, they don't have that capacity today.
Yeah, you mentioned China. As China expands its satellite and LEO capabilities, how is this shifting the competitive landscape for the other operators in Asia, that APEC you talked about?
Yeah, I think there are really two sides to this story. So on the one hand, China is expanding satellite and LEO capabilities, can really kind of create a competitive threat, right, to the existing operators in the region. And that competition can really show up in terms of, throughput, but also on price as well. Although we're kind of still trying to figure out what the pricing strategy would be of those Chinese constellations when they actually are fully deployed. But you could also see it as, a bit of an opportunity for operators in the region, because it also provides more choice for them and kind of greater flexibility for those regional players. And I can give you an example there. I think Miasat in Malaysia was one of the first resellers of Starlink in the country. But then Starlink also decided to add other resellers in Malaysia, and against that backdrop, basically, Miasat decided as well to look at for other options, and they became the first international partner of the China 1,000 sales constellation. So here is a good example of this provides an opportunity or more opportunities for the existing players in the market. And they can position them, a little bit differently, I would say, increasingly competitive market.
Oh, this rapidly changing market, it's tough for me to ask the long-term question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, with major players like China and India accelerating launch and manufacturing capability. So how are these regional operators adjusting their long-term fleet plans, if they have any plans, huh?
Yeah, no, they have plans, and definitely they are seriously reviewing those plans. And again, it comes a little bit to the earlier point, right? Obviously you can see it as a competition, but also, and let's take the positive spin here, it also becomes this optionality for them to benefit from those new capabilities coming to the markets. And it's also fair to say, if you look at these regional operators today, they have been struggling to close the business case based on the existing kind of solutions out in the market. So we see now like KTSat, for example, in Korea, looking at and signing deals with new solutions like an Ascent Arc geo platform to really try to find more competitive way and a more capital efficient use of these capabilities. And I think there are similar opportunities as well, around India and China solutions. And in the region, obviously, there has been long historic ties between different countries, with India and China. So again, we believe that those kind of partnerships are becoming more prominent in the next few years. The other side question, though, still, right? Most of these capabilities in China and India are also built to kind of meet their own demand, right? So it's kind of still the question out there. Once they kind of meet their own national demand, is there like still capacity available for them to serve as well international clients? And I think that's still a question we would like to see in the next few years, if that's really become available to other regional and international players.
Well, Nathan, you've been involved in this business for a long time. You probably observed something I've had. The word sovereign seems to be coming up more and more just in the last 5 or 6 years. So as governments invest more heavily in sovereign connectivity programs, how is this changing the structure and duration of commercial capacity agreements?
Yeah, we've definitely seen some changes in there. So first, there's true, right? There's a growing interest from governments in having kind of dedicated satellite support, national sovereignty requirements. And we've seen it quite recently, in Philippines, for example, strong government support in procuring some satellites from Stranas, for example. But also, these satellites take time to build, right? They talk about multi-year gaps. So there's always kind of this time between, the intent and the operational reliability. So we still see quite a bit of capacity agreements kind of as a temporary kind of gap filler till those new programs are becoming available. I think the second part of the story here and the change is also a little bit generated by Starlink. They are definitely more built around, not necessarily long-term fixed contracts, so much more flexibility in usage and in contract terms. And that really has reset expectations as well in the market. So most of the government and end users are increasingly pushing for more flexibility and then these kind of very traditional long-term agreements. And finally, I think, there's a still important part, the sovereignty requirement also comes back to the question, right? For a lot of these countries to not be fully dependent on a single operating system, right? So I think beyond what you would also see, they will not probably bet on a single solution. You will probably expect a more layered approach, I think, with different solutions and really kind of balancing the speed and ability to address the market needs now, but also to maintain national control.
As satellite and terrestrial networks move towards shared standards, which aspects of that convergence are most likely to reshape service delivery models?
Yeah, when we talk about convergence between satellite and terrestrial networks, the most visible and immediate impact is clearly in this direct-to-device and IoT arena. So this is where standards are already reshaping service delivery models. We're seeing these commercial D2D services already live in markets like Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. And actually, according to a recent study by Ookla, Australia is now the second largest D2D market globally after United States. So there's a clear leading role of some of the Asian countries. Next to it, I would say Australia, Japan stands out with all the MNOs basically being engaged and signed up to deliver D2D services. So it's not really kind of an experimental projects anymore. It really turns into kind of real adoption. But on the longer term, however, the bigger impact of convergence probably will come more from kind of fully integrated systems, right? So think about true convergence by embedding basically different parts of the mobile networks and not necessarily being in the satellite being the bolt-on service solution. And I think, here what we probably gonna expect to see over the long term is when you basically really bring all the different layers of telco satellite solutions all together. And really where we would see kind of, instead of a separate terrestrial and satellite offering, operators being able to deploy like more unified satellite plus terrestrial network stack. And in practical terms, that means that countries already using, for example, and 4G, 5G infrastructure could eventually be approached with an integrated 6G offering that really includes satellite connectivity by default rather as an add-on. So again, I think the convergence is just at a starting point. But again, we're in the future, we'll be moving to more this truly seamless, ambiguous network where satellite is built in from day one.
Well, speaking of networks, let's focus on the ground here a little bit. Where are operators concentrating their ground segment modernization efforts, and what strategic or maybe even operational drivers are shaping those decisions?
Yeah, so globally, satellite operators are really focusing on their ground segment modernization, primarily around the software layer. So things like orchestration, automation, and dynamic traffic management. And the reason for that is now that we have this influx of capacity, right? And the multi-orbit networks, LEO, MEO, GEO, all working together. But that capacity is only useful if it's coordinated intelligently from the ground. So just adding bandwidth doesn't create value if you can't route traffic, aggregate links, and allocate it in real time. So this is strategically what's happening, right? This is where the shift basically is. So, customers today they really expect this integrated service-driven solutions, and again, so the ground segment is basically the orchestrator of that, and becoming a real differentiator. And then operationally, of course, it's all about scalability and cost, and this is where automation really comes into play to really scale these solutions without spiraling the cost out of control. Now, the other point I think specifically about Asia is that it's not just a modernization story. There's also kind of this structural challenge, with regulation and sovereignty. So first, you kind of get these requirements in countries like India and Vietnam, right, where the data needs to be handled within the country and cannot leave the border. So that's really pushing, operators to build these localized and country-specific gateways rather than relying on more regional teleports. And also there's a strong push for some of the countries to kind of control the ground segment. So governments really want to have this end-to-end control of communication networks. So again, here is where I think a specific to the Asian region is it's about localization, it's about sovereignty and layering that all together in a meaningful way. So in a certain way, the ground segment is becoming not just kind of a technical or strategic asset, but also a geopolitical one.
Well, we can delve into this whole network architecture topic for a while here. So how are operators adapting network architecture and service commitments as cybersecurity and data sovereignty rules grow more stringent across Asia?
Yeah, these issues are becoming increasingly important, especially in today's environment. So what I'm seeing is that the operators are still assessing cybersecurity and data sovereignty requirements much more on a country-by-country basis, rather than kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. Anecdotally, so recently we saw the Chinese constellations tend to be more flexible around their data landing requirements than for example, SpaceX. And there was an example in Kazakhstan where Starlink was initially selected to connect a large school network, but Radar declined to build a local gateway in the country, and that's why the project never materialized. And about 6 months later, the SpaceSil, the Chinese constellation, established a local subsidiary, and basically, was able and willing to meet those, comply to the regulations, and be able to directly serve that market. So, again, different approaches, and each of the operators have to make these decisions on a country basis.
Yeah. With more countries relying on commercial Earth observation data to strengthen deterrence, how is AI improving early warning and decision support capabilities?
Yeah, one of the big trends over the last 12 months is clearly across Asia is a big push towards investment in Earth observation capabilities and commercial EO data. And AI is central as well to this shift, right? To really benefit from those capabilities in a few ways. So first, we see AI is changing how satellites handle the data at the source, right? So EO satellites, collect a lot of imagery, and in many cases, not all of that imagery is valuable or useful, either due to cloud cover or other, poor angles or other kind of less relevant images being taken. So again, the AI processes on board will help to filter the good, let's say, images and be able to only downlink the data that is really needed. The second part, obviously, as the data availability grows, AI becomes essential on the ground as well. So instead of, having analysts manually sifting through images, AI models can help to analyze these massive data sets to detect changes, which is obviously a key user application of the EO market. And then the next step, and arguably the most important one, is predictive analytics, right? So AI does not just detect activity, it can start to anticipate behavior. And that includes, for example, troop movements or probability to assess certain specific conflict scenarios. So it's really becoming the ability of AI to bridge the gap between observation and foresight. And there are examples, I think, in Asia where we see that being implemented. And again, I think, going forward, this AI central really depend how quickly we can scale the EO market.
Yeah. Nathan, earlier you mentioned those 50 countries in APEC and so many different flavors in Asia. I mean, all kinds of different ones out there. So how are operators approaching financing in an environment where capital access, state involvement, and risk tolerance vary so widely across these Asian markets?
Yeah. Operators they across Asia are having to rethink how space assets are financed, and especially in this kind of rapidly changing market environment. Traditional kind of this balance sheet heavy satellite ownerships that have worked for decades don't really make so much sense in this new environment. And we're seeing now growing interest in alternative financing models. So there are companies like Space Leasing International. They play an interesting role here. They basically procure new satellite technology and allowing operators to access the capacity without taking up full upfront capital burden. So that approach can really be helping and quite critical where in markets where financing is tight and technology risk is potentially higher. So there's a real untapped opportunity, I think, to apply these kind of financing structures that are also used already in other industries like aircraft leasing, for example, and apply that to the satellite industry. So that would help operators to free up capital by selling capacities, satellites as well, existing satellites, and leasing them back to other entities. And again, this is, I think, one of the ways we would see being a more intelligent use of the capital and also much lighter financing structures for operators to manage their business.
So Nathan, which partnership models are gaining traction as operators look to expand geographic reach, diversify services, or maybe even enter new verticals?
Yes, there are a few partnership models that come to mind. The first is distribution partnerships, which are fundamentally about building skill and gaining market access. So operators, they've been increasingly partnering with telcos and local resellers to penetrate markets that are difficult to access or highly regulated. I think India is the prime example here. So I think all satellite operators have been positioning. So OneWeb, for example, established partnership with Bharti. Starlink has been engaging with multiple domestic telcos. And these arrangements really allow those satellite players to leverage existing distribution channels and the kind of the client relationships those telco partners have. Another model is what we call more a platform and ecosystem-based partnerships. So this is where satellite operators and telcos are effectively merging their commercial ecosystems. So satellite services being kind of embedded in their kind of billing systems and really, bundled into kind of terrestrial, non-terrestrial network solutions. And in some cases, this also extends to cloud partnerships, actually, where satellite connectivity is coupled with edge computing and cloud infrastructure and managed services. So really those kind of services and partnership models together kind of really shift from what is historically be a very narrow satellite-focused service offering to a more integrated, collaborative approach to the goal to scale and expand reach.
How are operators positioning themselves in maritime, aviation, and rural connectivity markets, and which commercial models are showing the most scalability?
Yeah, so across maritime, aviation, and rural connectivity, we see kind of a clear split between or global scale players and more targeted operator strategies. So the most scalable commercial markets are actually being captured by, the vertically integrated players like Starlink and Amazon Leo, because they can really drive the scale, maintain control in terms of high volumes, economies of scale that can really lead to aggressive pricing. So as a result, I think the operators, the traditional ones or the regional ones, are better to focus on more insulated and defensible opportunities where they can really deliver, value rather than compute purely on scale. And there are different examples for that. I believe, one of the examples we see today still in the market is, the rural connectivity, obviously providing connectivity to more rural villages or population. It remains a very government-led vertical, and there's many programs that in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, really well-known programs that are funded at a national level, and really serve and being implemented by the provincial and municipality authorities. And operators that succeeded in these programs tend to fall in one of the two categories. So the either being the kind of the foreign players with kind of the right capacity at the right time. So that's particularly what we've seen on the Indonesia's Bhakti program. Or the other kind of successful were the strong local champions, like a local domestic operator like Miasat being successful in Malaysia with the Jandela program. So in general, overall, I would argue that scalability today favors kind of the big constellations, and traditional operators are more carving out their strategic positioning and more closely aligned to governments and specific market opportunities that are not easily addressed by those bigger constellations.
I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast realizes how big the market's growing in Asia. And as Asia's satellite sector matures, which strategic decisions facing operators today are likely to have the most lasting impact on this competitive landscape?
Yeah, this really gets to the heart, I think, of the issue faced by satellite operators in Asia today. And many of them are going what I sometimes call effectively a midlife crisis, right? They're asking themselves, who are we? Are we a regional satellite operator? Are we a managed service provider? Are we a national space tech champion? And they'll have to make the decision on this identity question. And that will really determine how the competitive landscape will shape up over the next few years. One of the kind of key debates in the market still is the geo versus NGSO debate. And Asia is a highly fragmented and politically complex region, which I think we've talked already quite a bit about. So it's very hard to kind of, as a nation, build your own pan-Asian NGSO constellation. So in what I would expect is that, the CapEx efficient flexible geo satellites will continue to play kind of a critical role, especially for, meeting those sovereign demands. So in all, I think, there's quite a bit of opportunity for the regional operators. But again, they have to make the decision whether it is sovereign focused, whether it is kind of a full space tech, defense delivery, or maybe a more managed service provider where you combine the telecom and the satellite solutions jointly and reposition yourself to that market. So yeah, some big decisions to make. But I think, over the long run, with so much opportunity into the market, I think there's enough room for many of these players to be quite successful.
Nathan, I think you've given our listeners a real good handle on the satellite capacity in Asia. I'd like to thank our guest, Nathan de Ruiter, Partner and Managing Director at Novaspace.
Thank you, John.